felt if I wanted to succeed, I had to act white.
61% of respondents said that discrimination was widespread across Europe.
The key difference between being not racist and anti-racism for me is really courage.
We know that in Europe, racism and prejudice affects minority groups, Roma communities, and it affects them in education and it affects them in society at large. And we know that education has a really, really important role in tackling this challenge. The European Commission recently released a report that said that amongst the surveys that they did across European partners, 61% of respondents said that discrimination based on skin color in 2025 was not only common, but widespread across Europe.
Stereotyping happens when we start attributing negative traits to an entire group by exaggerating their weaknesses and overlooking their strengths. And when prejudice and stereotyping target people who differ in skin color, in religion, in language, in other cultural traditions, then they become what we call racial and ethnic bias. This bias is not only loud and intentional, it can also be quiet, dormant, unconscious, and still very ready to resurface when it is triggered by fear, by hateful narratives, and by moments of crisis. And that is why anti-racism is such an important but also demanding task. When you compile the results of thousands of implicit association tests, which have been taken online across Europe, the finding is very concerning. You find out that 7 in 10 respondents show pro-white bias, with 1 in 4 showing strong pro-white bias.
I think I probably knew about anti-racism before I really had the vocabulary to call it anti-racism. I didn't necessarily understand how to talk about it. But I think one of the things that I've really experienced over time is learning that the key difference between being not racist and anti-racism for me is really courage, because you can do the work, I believe, to see bias and inequality. But really, it's about being brave enough to actually actively challenge and not take a stance of neutrality. And I think that's what really starts us to move in the right direction.
For me, anti-racism means that you make room, that you are aware of the personality you have in the society, and that you want to create an environment where everyone can be seen and valued. Because in my experience, I felt if I wanted to succeed, I had to act white. And that was valued in our society, and you had to hidden part of yourself. And I feel like most of my friends felt the same way.
Për mua antiracizmi është më shumë se një parim, është një mënyrë jetesës dhe një angazhim i përditshëm për të sfiduar çdo formë e paragjykimit, qoftë të dukshëm apo të fshehur, si pjesë e një komuniteti që baza ose breza me radhë është përmballur me diskriminime, nënvlerësime, antiracizme, paragjykime të ndryshme, dhe për me i shmang që ta, neve na duhet më shumë guxim, edukim dhe mu përfshi më shumë si komunitete të marginalizuar në çdo aktivitet ose në çdo hapësira të cilat janë gjithëpërfshirëse.
Anti-racism in school means that every student feels seen and valued, no matter their background. I tried in my lessons to teach history from multiple perspectives, and also to make them aware that most of the stories that we heard are stories from the winners. And what about the people who were conquered? Didn't have a story? I tried also to tell stories where people can feel empowered. Like we did an exhibition about non-Western medieval societies, but also medieval societies is also a Western concept. But just to tell them, to make them realize that there are so many civilizations, so many stories, so many important figures that were not white, how they can feel empowered. And I saw it in the eyes of my students of color, how they were amazed and inspired about those people. But also I saw it in the eyes of the white people who could see people of color scholar in different positions.
A key session that we had this term was really around decolonising the curriculum and supporting teachers to have the confidence to be able to do that work in their own schools as well. And for me, that meaningful change is what anti-racism is all about. That particular session, as I mentioned, was run by an alumni, and she helped her peers really see how they can move from having a Eurocentric lens on the science curriculum, because she was a science teacher, but she also gave examples of how you could do that in other subjects, to having a more global lens that better represents the diverse pupil population that she teaches. And I think that's something that's really important to remember. There's the recognition that we Teach First work with schools in the most disadvantaged areas of England, and that disadvantage can look different in different places, but it's also really important to see that in some areas that those pupil populations are hugely diverse, while the staff populations are not.
Mungesa e dokumenteve ose librave rome e prek jo vetëm procesin mësimor, por edhe identitetin e fëmijëve tanë dhe mënyrën se si ata e shohin veten, sepse nga kjo idea unë mendoj që kom lind ideën për me hap një bibliotekën rome, dhe pikërisht me qetë drugëtim unë ja mundsova 2 anës me I ul edhe paragjykimet edhe me I tregu rëndësinë e gjuhës rome, që e kemi një gjuhë, jemi tu e luftu për që gjuhë, jemi tu e mbrojtë që gjuhën, po ashtu edhe jemi tu e dokumentu në një vend e cilën mund të përdorin edhe komunitetet tjera. Kjo bibliotek nuk është vetëm një vend ku merren librat, ajo është vetëm një hapësirë e ruajtjes së gjuhës, sepse çdo dokument I cili vjen te na është I vetmi dhe nuk mundet me I gjetë në një vend tjetër, kështu që edhe fëmijët tanë mund të shohin materiale që flasin më shumë për historinë e veta, për ta, dhe që I përkasin atyre dhe tregojnë gjuhën dhe kulturën e tyre, jo që është vetëm që tash, po e kena pasur edhe më herë, dhe kjo e tregon e krijon aty me një vetbesim, krenari për identitetin e vet.
Racial and ethnic minority students who perform just as well as majority peers on blind tests tend to receive lower grades when they are assessed in a non-blind manner, which is a pattern that we observe in several European countries for which we have data. So in this context, it becomes essential for teachers to be aware of their own unconscious bias so they can reduce the risk of unintentionally disadvantaging racial and ethnic minority students in their daily practice. And at the OECD, we have recently deepened our work on understanding how school-based interventions can foster this openness. However, one of the main lessons that emerges from this work is that, as reported by several NGOs, civil society organizations who deliver these school-based interventions, these interventions are increasingly vulnerable to negative group dynamics and even backlash due to students' growing exposure to online disinformation. So this suggests that for schools to fulfill their anti-racism mission effectively, we should equip teachers with the capacity to support children and young people in navigating online environments by helping them better recognize and disengage from extreme hate and prejudice online, including misogyny, homophobia, and racism.
Final thought would probably be just a call to action, but I would say really think about kind of how are you actively engaging in it? How are you seeking out opportunities to either put in the work or support others? And kind of what is happening in your workplaces, what conversations are happening amongst your families and your friends, is really try and make that a priority for yourself. And in itself, I think you kind of model that to other people and other people to start that and for that to really continue the movement.